In this video, I want to discuss with you how to naturally increase your dopamine levels using holistic tips and tonic herbs. So now dopamine is a neurotransmitter that's secreted by the hypothalamus. So it is a very important brain chemical that is often associated with feelings of happiness, motivation, and increased cognition. So the ability to focus, pay attention, and be aware. Now in the nervous system, dopamine is responsible for things like locomotion. So it animates the body. That's the feeling of being motivated when dopamine's in the bloodstream. So when you have high levels of dopamine, it gets your body moving. Dopamine is also responsible for many aspects of your cognition or your cognitive function. And it also has many roles in neuroendocrine secretion, which basically means that dopamine has an effect on other neurotransmitters and other hormones, as do all neurotransmitters and hormones, which brings us to something that's vitally important to understand when we're talking about neurotransmitters and other brain chemicals, which is that you would never really want to supplement an isolated neurotransmitter or hormone due to their synergistic nature. So even if you have low dopamine levels or any neurotransmitter for that matter, the last thing you'd ever want to do is self-medicate with an isolated supplement or synthetic version of that hormone. It'd have negative side effects because of the fact that every neurotransmitter and hormone affects other neurotransmitters and hormones. So they have an interconnected relationship with the rest of the nervous system, the rest of the endocrine system. However, not just that, but the body is never going to be fully satisfied on any physical form of the thing that it's looking for, the thing that it's craving or that it's addicted to. Take alcoholics, for example. An alcoholic would never become satisfied from alcohol, which is very interesting because alcohol seems to be the thing that that person or their body is craving. However, I once heard addictions described as not getting enough of the thing you most don't want. So what that means is that the body can't get enough of that alcohol. And on a certain level, the body doesn't even want the alcohol. What it's looking for is something within the substance, so something specific. However, the reason the body would never become fully satisfied is because the body is not looking for it from the outside world. It's looking to be able to achieve that internally again. So ultimately the body's looking for homeostasis. It's looking for a regained ability to produce that energy, that chemical, that neurotransmitter itself. So in the case of just trying to supplement with something physically, the body will not ultimately be satisfied, because what the body would be satisfied with is homeostasis, is with the ability to produce its own energy and its own chemicals. So with that being said, the ideal scene would be that we would help our body achieve the goal of secreting and producing its own dopamine. So we want to have this cooperative relationship, a shared goal with the body. We can help the body produce enough dopamine, but we're not going to necessarily just give it dopamine, which would ultimately make it dependent, weak, and unsatisfied. And it could lead to an addiction, an external substance. So the goal is that we would share the goal of secreting an appropriate amount of dopamine so that we can feel motivated, so that way we can feel happy, we can feel good, we can be focused, we can feel accomplished in life. And so something else that's important to understand before we get into the practical aspect of this video is that the body is not at cause. The body is the effect. Ultimately, while the body can create problems, so the body can obviously have a chemical imbalance, if you will, ultimately neurotransmitters and hormones are responding to our consciousness. However, we, the operator, the spirit that dwells within the body, and the body obviously has an interrelated relationship. So if the body is not functioning properly, it can make us feel a certain way. And if we're not feeling good, then obviously that can affect the body negatively. So the body can have an effect on us, but ultimately when we look at who is senior, who's in charge, we have senior position over the body. And a very simple example of that is, despite your physical condition, you can choose to feel good, which has a hormonal effect on the body. So that is something that's key and important in understanding, is that many people are told they have a chemical imbalance and that's the reason they're unhappy. But it is more likely that the chemical imbalance is the result or the byproduct of you being unhappy. So now with that concept in mind, let's get into some practical things we can do to increase dopamine levels in a healthy and natural way. So the first thing that we want to do, considering that dopamine is more or less a happiness chemical, it is the chemical secreted by the endocrine system when we are feeling happy. And as I mentioned earlier, of course, if you have a high level of dopamine in the body, so if you were to take dopamine, like doing drugs, that increases dopamine, you're going to feel better. But as we all know, a drug, a medicine, makes us dependent. Literally, that word medicine means to come between operation. The Latin root medi means to be in the middle, a medium in between. And sin, like cinema, means action. So all medication or medicine interrupts the natural action or flow of chi within the body. So that is one reason why we ultimately don't want to take medicine, is it can have these negative effects in the body and disrupt its natural homeostasis, its natural balance. However, it also costs money, and it's going to lead to that unsatisfactory feeling of not being able to produce it yourself. So the best thing you can do then to increase your dopamine levels naturally is to just be happy. So find things that make you happy. Now, of course, the thing we need to understand is, what is happiness? Well, despite many different relative viewpoints on the subject of happiness, happiness in the most basic level is the accomplishment of a goal. Whenever somebody says that they're happy or they like to do things that make them happy, they're really just talking about accomplishing their goals. So that's a very relative and very subjective idea, the idea of happiness. But that's really all it is on the most basic level. You are happy when you have achieved your goal, no matter what that goal is. So what that means is you have to get honest with yourself about what makes you happy. What is it that you want to accomplish in life? Now keep in mind, this could be anything. You could be unhappy because you would have a very unrealistic goal. So you're not going to be happy unless you have $1 million or something by tomorrow. Now, as long as that's your goal, you're not going to feel that moment of happiness until you achieve it. So becoming aware of your own goals, your true, honest goals in life, is step number one in achieving true happiness and therefore increasing dopamine levels. So a really good question to ask yourself is, what do you want to do in life that you haven't done yet? This will bring up your goals in life, especially the goals you haven't accomplished yet. That could be leading to your inevitable unhappiness and depression. You haven't fulfilled your goals and therefore you feel unhappy. So write down your true and honest goals in life, what you truly want to have, do, and be in life, and then make a sort of action plan or a plan of action so that way you can do the things necessary to accomplish that goal. Now moving into tip number 2, that's sort of tied with tip number 1, would be to make a daily list. And the real secret behind making a daily list is that you don't give yourself too much to do at once. I recommend writing down 3 things every day. And the way to look at it would be, what 3 things could you do on a daily basis that would produce the most amount of your happiness and desired outcome? So really get honest with yourself and just look at what would be 3 things that if you did in that day, you would truly be happy and feel fulfilled. Write those things down. And the other tip is to not start a new cycle until you've completed the first one. You could ultimately say that unhappiness is the result of incomplete cycles of action. So if you set out to do something, let's say, you're going to go for that walk around the park and you didn't do it. That's going to decrease your dopamine levels, make you feel like a failure, make you feel unhappy. Now, if you accomplish that, you're going to feel happy. Very simple. But let's say you don't accomplish that one, then you move into your next task. I failed at this thing, let me move to the next thing. The problem with that is you're going to move into your next goal with a lack of momentum and inertia. So the thing you want to do is build this momentum up by writing down only 3 things every day, 3 things that are easy for you to do, but that are also worthwhile, and only accomplish those 3 things in numerical order. So don't do the second one until you've done the first one. And the way that this positively affects your dopamine levels is that it is scientifically known that dopamine increases once you have achieved a goal or completed a task or finished something. And going back to our definition of happiness, that's really what happiness is, the accomplishment of a goal. Overcoming an obstacle towards a goal makes you feel good, increases dopamine levels. So making this daily list is a simple way to complete some tasks that are going to make you feel good, increase your dopamine levels, and start building some momentum, but it's also going to result in happiness, which is going to increase your dopamine levels. So now another thing that you can do on a very practical end would just be to expand your awareness. Do something that increase your interest. Find something new, make a new discovery, learn something. Now, it's in my opinion at least that one of the major reasons people don't have enough dopamine and why they're not happy is because they live very disconnected from the natural world. And when you think about it, anytime you've ever gone into nature, real authentic nature, not your city park, you always make a new discovery. There's always something new happening. The natural world is very dynamic, very alive. There's 1,000,001 plants that if you really got up and close, you could look at them and start learning something new. It's constantly changing. And all these things are going to expand your awareness, increase your level of interest, and that will also increase your dopamine levels. And I'm sure, though I haven't researched the study necessarily that there's probably a specific correlation between just being in nature and increased dopamine levels, but it's likely due to this expansion in your awareness, finding things to be really interesting, really exciting, and really new. So if you can, get outside or hop on the internet, watch a new documentary, read a new book, meet a new person, find a way to make a new discovery and increase your awareness, and you should likely experience a higher level of happiness and increase dopamine levels. Now for a few tips on the physical end, one thing you can do to increase dopamine naturally would be to increase your intake of tyrosine-rich foods. Now tyrosine is the amino acid that is the building block or precursor to dopamine production. So getting in enough tyrosine, that specific amino acid, can help your brain produce more dopamine on a chemical level. And best of all, foods that are rich in tyrosine are often very delicious. So they're things like coffee, chocolate, avocados, bananas, and milk. So these are foods that most people probably consume on a pretty regular basis, but you're feeling depressed, increase your intake of those foods and see if you feel a little bit happier. Another thing to do on the physical end to increase your dopamine levels would be to bring down endotoxins. Lipopolysaccharides or endotoxins are bacteria that form in the gut, usually in the small intestine, and they inhibit the production of dopamine. And a really simple way to bring down the endotoxins in your gut would be to eat a raw carrot daily or a raw carrot salad. When carrots grow in the ground, in order to protect themselves from bacteria and other sort of bugs or microorganisms in the soil, and that's the reason why they don't decompose down there, is they produce a natural antifungal chemical within them, and when you eat them, you sort of intake and you utilize that same natural antifungal, which is specifically known to kill off endotoxins in the gut, which can improve your overall immunity, but also increase dopamine levels. So something else you can do to increase your dopamine levels that is very effective and free would be to just relax. It is known that cortisol inhibits the production of dopamine as well as many other very important neurotransmitters. So relaxing, bringing down stress hormones like cortisol is going to increase your happiness naturally. Now obviously this is easier said than done. The art of true relaxation has been lost and replaced with sitting in front of the TV or doing some sort of mind-numbing activity, but that's not true deep relaxation. I'm talking about truly letting go of thinking, feeling, everything, and just simply observing, being aware, and just being present, taking in the riches of the present moment. Now again, this is obviously easier said than done. I find personally that it's easier in nature to just drop your mind and look around and get lost in the beauty. So going for a walk in nature is a great way to truly relax. But if you truly have trouble with relaxing and chilling out, then I recommend getting some sort of spiritual mentor, somebody that can really help you sort your mind out and learn to deeply relax again. Because I find that most people that can't truly relax have some level of addiction to suffering. In the words of my mentor, the way to get rid of suffering is to be finished with suffering. So in other words, instead of trying to get rid of suffering, you need to suffer so much that suffering finally becomes disinteresting to you and you no longer need to suffer at all. So again, easier said than done. Seek a spiritual mentor or just go for a walk in nature, but find a way to truly relax and shut off your mind and get into that deep state of homeostasis, a parasympathetic state, so you can secrete these feel-good neurotransmitters that are often inhibited by stress hormones, suffering, pain, etc. So now last but not least, there are two very helpful tonic herbs for increasing dopamine levels, and those are schizandra and pine pollen. Now looking at schizandra is known to reduce stress-induced anxiety, so the anxiety that you feel with elevated levels of cortisol. And it's also an MAO inhibitor. So by being an MAO inhibitor, it helps increase your uptake of dopamine, which is inhibited by MAO or monoamine. So supplementing with schizandra is known clinically, but also personally, in my experience and most other people I recommend to increase dopamine levels naturally and energize you and make you a little bit more resilient to stress due to its adaptogenic and modulatory effects on the endocrine system. And then pine pollen contains actual phenylalanine, which is a precursor to dopamine production. So by taking pine pollen, you're going to get the very important amino acids, nutrients, and chemicals that increase your ability to produce dopamine naturally. So these are my tips on increasing dopamine naturally, along with a few tonic herbs that you can start utilizing today. If you found this video helpful, definitely give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, and if you're interested in supplementing with schizandra or pine pollen, you can check those out by clicking the link below.